Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Scott. On behalf of the Center for Hellenic Studies in Washington, D.C., I'm here with Leonard Muellner. We've been looking at some of the discussions and comments and questions on the HeroesX discussion forums, and there's lots of interesting thoughts and ideas that are coming up. We'll just cover a few of them today. So what we'd like to start with is thinking about how in ancient Greek song culture there are interactions between mortals and divinities, how that may be different from modern culture, and a whole number of other differences between the way this song culture talks about concepts that maybe is different from what we're used to. So Lenny, perhaps you could help us with that.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. So yes, one of the things about the way we use this term song culture, and it refers to societies in which the word song, as Professor Naj talks about it, immediately evokes a performance, and I think that's what we're talking about. The Iliad and the Odyssey are the products of a song culture, and were meant to be performed in special circumstances by performers who are specially trained to sing and compose at the same time. And it's not a medium that depends on the written word. These are strange concepts to us, but a lot of us even know about song performance in our own cultures, have a lively experience of traditional songs of all sorts, and I think popular song is not a bad analogy to what's happening with epic poetry in ancient Greece, because this is something that's a real universal phenomenon that everyone participates in. So one of the basic problems when you start reading the Iliad is it doesn't say anything to explain itself. It doesn't tell you who anyone is, what's happening, where you are. It happens to be the 10th year of the war of the Achaeans against the Trojans, and it tells you about it starts right in the middle of the story. So how come it does that? Well, because it can count on the fact that this is a song culture in which everyone is presumed to know the stories, and you get thrown in if this isn't part of your culture, you get thrown in the deep end, and you flail around. So I think I feel sympathy for this. It's also exciting in a way, and reading and rereading is an appropriate analog to hearing and being part of a song culture. That is, the first time you might not understand a lot of what's going on. The second time it'll get better, and so forth. These are not stories that you're supposed to, or that anyone in the culture, in a way. Here's a weird idea: you're not supposed to be hearing them for the first time. Okay, they're familiar, and what happens when you have this sort of a situation is that the stories get better and better, the performances get better and better, and you as the listener get more and more in tune with what's going on and how the characters are being portrayed and the beauty of the poetry and so forth. So it's a situation that optimizes those experiences. This is different in some fundamental ways from our understanding of stories, because we like stories that we supposedly don't know what's going to happen, right? A lot of the times there are cues and we don't necessarily even acknowledge them, but we can tell, what we have conventions about who can get killed in a story, and authors play with those conventions and stuff like that. But whatever is going on in one's particular culture, this is a different song culture, and you need to kind of be patient with yourself and with the challenge of trying to get into it. So that's one thing. Another aspect to song culture is that the stories, as I was going to mention, the stories, people know how they turn out, okay? That doesn't mean that they become boring. If you know the outcome of a story. What I think, to encapsulate it in a simple way, what replaces suspense is anticipation. Okay, it's the way if you go to a movie with a friend that you've already seen the movie and you go with a friend, your experience is anticipating for your friend what's going to happen, but it's still fun for you, okay, because you know what's going to happen. You start to see different things. I think so. Thinking about the performances of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and of other kinds of poetry that we come across in the ancient hero project, in these sorts of terms as being something that's available to everyone, and it's not that, for example, a vase painter has read the Iliad. Okay, it's that both the vase painter and the performer of the Iliad know the songs, and they're each representing them in their own way. So one can, there are variations, there's fluidity in the way the stories are told in a song culture, and there are different versions of them, but they're out there for everyone to know and to become familiar with, and to appreciate in their variety and in the beauty of their retelling. So it's a retelling situation, and that has an effect on a relationship to the notion of names. Okay, the names of the characters in the stories have a relationship to their stories, and just like, there are some simple examples of this in Western European traditions. Like in fairy tales, you have Sleeping Beauty is the name of a character, and that's an important aspect of her story. It doesn't predetermine her story. It reflects on and is a reflection of. So you want to think of it as these interactive terms. It's not that the name controls the story. It's that the story is a reflection of the name, and vice versa. So if we look at the name of Achilles, here's just one little thing that might be interesting and helpful. There's only one place in the whole of the Iliad where it's said that something, his name is composed of two elements. This word for achos, which means grief that's associated with the death of a person. It means, and it's associated with lament. And the other part of it is the word laos, which means the social group. In the context of the Iliad, it's the tightly bound social group of the warriors who are interrelated, bound by ties of friendship and to one another, and so forth. So that's the laos. But there's only one place in the poem where the two words occur together. And it's only about one person. It's when Patroclus, who gets, this is a spoiler alert, okay, if you don't know these things, but spoiler alerts are part of the way this all should be working. This when Patroclus, who dresses up as Achilles, okay, and really is embodying him, at the very moment that he dies, the poet says that it gave achos to the laos. Okay, that's the one time that occurs about a person who's impersonating the hero. And so it's not so much that it's his death that's a sorrow to everyone. And we also have there's a report of a tradition. You all know about things like Olympic Games and things like that. In Olympic Games are like in ancient Greece, there are a set of these games. There were the Pythian Games, the Nemean Games. The Olympic Games were the most famous of them. But they're all supposed to be games like the funeral games at the end of the Iliad, in repetition of funeral games for a dead hero. In theory, the Olympic Games are about a hero in Olympia, but in fact, there's a tradition that at the night before the Olympic Games, the women of the town near Olympia, which is called Elis, and which is on the coast, went to the seashore, and as the sun set, they sang laments for Achilles, as though, among other traditions, the Olympic Games were actually funeral games for himself. Okay, so this gives you some of the sense of what's embedded in this name and the kind of social sorrow and the lament tradition that's associated with him, and what his name may mean in another context. I think this kind of may get you out of the discussion that we've been having into a different way of looking at this, who's the greatest of the heroes in the Iliad, this personage. Okay. wonder, Sarah, is this, do you have thoughts about this? Is this making some sense to you in terms of what we've been reading and seeing?
Okay. And we've been talking about that whole tradition. So there are things outside of the Iliad and within it. So we go right from a really, really small focus, like a name, that can be sort of unpacked to that whole story. But then that story goes outside of the Iliad itself, and so do some of the other people. So how can people understand who all these people are and what all their interrelationships are?
Yes, I think it's a matter of finding a good reference book for these things, or a resource online is one solution, but sometimes that can lead you astray because there can be several people with the same name. I think hanging in there, getting started and trying to figure things out as you go along can get you someplace, but I think you need some basic help about who are the gods and what their spheres are and who are the basic heroes, and there aren't that many of them. The poetic tradition has access to a huge amount of stories and a huge amount of names associated with them. It also, there are names that get reused, okay? It might be comforting to you to know that sometimes there's a hero whose name is Chromios, who starts out as a Greek. He gets killed 3 or 4 times and he ends up alive as a Trojan. Okay, so there are names that are part of the tradition that can be reused, okay, and there aren't especially don't necessarily involve an individual. I don't want to go, most of them are very much part of local traditions and stuff like that, so we shouldn't run away with that idea, but there are a lot of names even in the traditional context, and not all of them are totally filled up with individuals with their own stories. Okay, but I think you need to make an effort to get some kind of grasp on the basic personages and their stories. And when it comes to the way in which the epic tells you about other stories, like the story of Meleagros in the 9th Rhapsody of the Iliad, these things the epic can easily refer to all sorts of things, or the story of the Amazons, and it's assumed that you know them. You can try and inform yourself, but it's also easy to be misled. I think you don't want to think of we can also think, for example, what's behind a vase painting and what's behind a story in the Iliad is something that they have in common, not necessarily one or the other. In other words, the song culture, which is a world in which people have been hearing and telling each other stories, that's where the representations come from. It's sort of like a cloud, and there are these different instantiations of the stories. Okay, so trying to get a sense of not that a story told in the Iliad is the only form of the story, or that a story is being copied from another source when it's in the Iliad, or in a vase painting it's copied from the Iliad or another poem, okay, but that all of these are manifestations of songs that people have heard and have been learning since they're little children, and that are out there for them and for the poets in the tradition to point to, So when it comes, maybe we could switch a little bit out of this and see what we kind of response we get to this sort of talking about stories and thinking of them in this light, to if we talk a little bit about gods, okay, because I think this is a big obstacle, and I saw questions and comments that reflect the fact that this is another world from anything that we're used to. We're talking about a system of polytheistic gods. I mean, there are still cultures that are like this in our world, not to deny it. But in the Western world, the world of Christians and Muslims and Jews, you have a very different notion of divinity, and because you have a single divinity who's the creator of the world, and is not part of that world. Okay. Moreover, this single divinity in some of these traditions cannot be visualized. It's a taboo to do that, and even is not to be named in some cases, right? So this is nothing could be further away from the Greek gods, who are actually part of this world that we're in. Okay, that we think of gods as supernatural. That's the word that comes to mind for most of us. But these are natural gods. They represent the sex and military warlike violence, cunning, superior intelligence, the power of water, a whole bunch of culturally bound categories, culturally described categories. You have what's behind the polytheistic system is what anthropologists call a taxonomy of the world and the way it's divided up. And they got generated with the world in the tradition of the theogony, which you'll have a look at. They get generated with the world. It's not that that Zeus made them, okay? It's that they're all like us. They're procreated by male and female. Well, you'll see there are variations on that idea too. But the basic mechanism is the procreative system, which a female gives birth. And so another big difference is that it's not this idealized system in which the divinity who's outside of the world is responsible in some way for the maintenance and the moral value of the individuals within it. If you think that divinities are natural and part of human existence, the divine apparatus, as puzzling as this may sound, is meant to explain the way the world works. Okay, not how it should work, but the way it does work. Okay. So it accounts for things. It isn't a problem that good people die and bad people flourish in such a system, because it's actually built into it that these things are parts of human experience, and so the notion is to describe the way it works. So in terms of divinities who represent natural forces like Aphrodite, let's just take something that's quite basic. Aphrodite is the goddess of sexual energy and of procreation, and of feminine seductiveness and stuff like that, and so she presides over, in the Iliad, for example, two particular characters, Helen and Paris, whom she has a special relationship, and they have interactions with her. Okay, she can take mortal form and make them do things that they might not otherwise do, but there are interactions between divinities and mortals in the Iliad. And when Athena comes down and grabs Achilles by the back of the hair on his head, like a mother when she wants to stop a kid from doing something, or a father, she has to bargain with him. She says, Achilles says, "So do you like what's going on here?" And she says, "Well, if you stop yourself from killing Agamemnon, you'll get recompensed for it." Okay, so there's give and take between gods and mortals. Okay, and also the divinity, and that's part of the way in which the world is experienced. That some people have closer contact with individual mortals in the Iliad, and some have less. In general, I think it's a world in which the epic world reflects closer contact between the immortals and the immortals than there is in the world of us, the audience, because things have changed. We're a couple of generations away from these warriors, and their gods are more distant from us, but we still interact with them by giving them things and hoping to get things in exchange. That's a big principle for the way in which you work with the gods. So also, it's important to think of this as being as describing a reality. So Paris and Helen, for example, have a relatively more passive view of themselves. They're people who are in a way, embody what happens when you are the victims of sexual impulses that are overpoweringly great and take away some of your individualism. Whereas a person like Achilles is not, has a much more sense of himself and of his ability and his agency and his ability to do things. Okay, so characters and their relationships are also defined by their relationship to divinities, and you'll see that, for example, Odysseus has a special relationship to the goddess Athena, who is the goddess of two things: of cunning and of violence. Okay, of being very clever and tricky. Okay, it's cunning. It's not intelligence and rationalism, but trickiness and of overwhelming force. So these are kind of very important themes in the epic stories. And if after all you have Achilles as a hero of force and Odysseus is a hero of cunning, okay, this is not a coincidence. So these are I don't mean to oversimplify, but these are some of the basic things that condition the way the stories work, and the interactions that the gods have with the heroes and vice versa are more natural and less dealing with an overwhelming force. All right, and so this also means that when the gods interact amongst themselves, they're very human. Okay, you may think that Zeus is he's the overarching figure, and he supposedly is in charge, but the gods rebel against him. They try to do things without him knowing it. They try to controvert his will, just like people in a big family will deal with the father of the family by trying to get around him. Okay, so these they're very. It's not a rigid system in which one god is in charge of everything and everybody has to toe the line. It's a much more subtle, flexible, and human, in a way, representation of the way these powers that represent nature interact with themselves and with us as mortals who are subject to death, as opposed to them who never die, and who are natural.
Those forces continue.
Yeah. And those forces continue. Yeah. Yes. So I think trying to get your head out of this traditional model of what a single God is, an all-powerful, omniscient God who is not part of the world, and into a world in which you have many of them who interact and are responsible for different parts of the natural world and the cultural world, in our terms. Okay, it's a stretch. Okay, but I think it may help you in the end to understand better how these characters think about themselves, how they behave, and the different ways in which they understand reality and engage with each other. Okay.
Thank you. That's
okay.
Really fascinating, and that's given me a great perspective on the role of the gods. I hadn't really quite thought of it in terms of their interaction in that way, and that's helping me also thinking about that divine antagonism or relationship, or the opposite,
yes.
about how all that's working. So I that will also be helpful to our participants and viewers. So.
It's really nice is when you start to see how Achilles interacts with Apollo and Odysseus with Athena and Hermes. These are important things in the story. So yes.
And as you were saying earlier, they're kind of signaled in advance in some ways, and so we're all the time kind of going back and forth within the story and throughout the story and back again. So
yeah, exactly.
It's wonderful.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Lenny. And
okay.
we'll see you again next time.
Okay, great.